Okay, good evening from Bucharest. I'm John Florescu, and tonight we have a slight change of schedule because of the events of Saturday with Biden's election. I guess it's correctly some, even though unrecognized by some. We're going to move the 140 years of Romanian-American relations to later, and we're going to focus in on the election that just happened and the consequences of that. We were just informed within the last hour that Ambassador Gittenstein had to be pulled off because he's part of the advisory committee, the advisory transition team. And so we decided to go ahead focusing on Biden, and Ambassador Jim Rosapepe has been nice enough to step in. And so we're going to keep this next hour focused really pretty much on U.S.-Romanian relations today and here going forward. And we'll keep the historical introduction of Professor Dilettant that was set to go, as well as our two guests to a later date. And so please keep yourselves tuned in to the update. We don't know the date exactly, and we'll begin by welcoming Jim, for whom perhaps doesn't need much of, he deserves an introduction. But I'd like to point out that he was ambassador to Romania from 1998 to 2001. He's chair of the Italian-American Committee for the Biden campaign. And notably, he was part of the ambassadors group that Biden turned to and relied on. And of course, he's chairman of Alianta. So it's fantastic to have Jim here. For the rest of you, please, we hope you all stay on the line. And we probably won't last a full hour, but maybe 35 minutes, including some questions that we'll take in. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Very pleased to be with you.
Good. Well, listen, I guess the first question, you're perfectly well suited because in the thick of American politics, is what does the Biden win mean for U.S.-Romanian relations?
I think U.S.-Romanian relations have stayed strong through many, and that's part of the history that you were going to talk about today. There have been ups and downs, but relations have been a big part of Romania's foreign policy for a long time, and an important part of America's foreign policy. I think the big change with Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden's coming to the job in January is, for the first time in the history of U.S.-Romanian relations, there'll be a president of the United States who has deep experience with Romania. I think that's the most important thing. When I was ambassador, I remember Vice President Biden, then Senator Biden, coming to Romania in September of 1999 to thank the Romanian leadership for supporting NATO during the war in Kosovo. And I was the ambassador. I'd been there for, I don't know, a year and 3/4, something like that. And I wasn't surprised, but I was still amazed at how well he knew so many of the Romanian leaders. He knew them better than I did because he'd known them going back years, and he knew the intricacies of politics in a way that I'd kind of caught up with. But you cannot underestimate how much he knows about Romania. I think that's the big change.
And how many times did he come, Jim? How many times was he in Romania?
Over the years, I think it's 4 or 5 times.
Right.
And back to the Ceausescu period, and and he was of course there with Ambassador Gittenstein when Ambassador Gittenstein was representing the United States under President Obama.
So we have a friend in the White House. It seems that's the case. Romania, in this case, has a friend in the White House and somebody that understands the game pretty well. What would you say is sort of like the top 4 or 5 issues that sit between the United States and Romania right now?
Well, I think the issues are pretty similar to what they've been for many, many years, maybe for the 140 years that we've had diplomatic relations, which is there's the political aspect, the security aspect, and there's the economic aspect. And so I think those are all on the table now and will be on the table. Obviously, the economic piece of it is very much related to the international health crisis. And that's actually an area that I think has gotten less attention overseas perhaps than it deserves, is that President-elect Biden is very focused and has had expert advisors working for months to put together a very coherent forward-leaning plan to beat the virus internationally. For the Americans, for sure, but in cooperation with everybody else. And I think you're going to see that rolled out literally this week, a series of very specific proposals and plans. And I think that's important for the entire world economy, for the European economy, for the Romanian economy, because if the world community can get on top of the virus, the economy is going to come back a lot faster.
Right. You talked there about the issues that have been sort of on the table for decades or even, 140 years. I also noticed that they seem to transcend any political divides, because we saw that President Iohannis was, I think, the first leader to go to the White House, and I think he'd been twice to the White House. Any theories on why that was so close? Was there anything between Trump and Romania?
I would say, and I say this analytically, not judgmentally, I think President Trump is a very transactional leader. And I think, and from my experience as ambassador, I think Romanians understand transactional leaders. And so if the President of the United States says it's a big deal to him that European countries, NATO members, get their share of GDP spent on defense up to 2%, President Iohannis and the leadership of Romania said, okay, we can do that.
Yep.
He did that quickly, and that was very valuable to President Trump, because most of the other European countries didn't. And so he was able to point to Romania as a country that was doing, moving in a direction he wanted to go. But I also think that the bigger issue, which is the more challenging one, is simply the relationship with Russia, because that is the constant in Romanian political history and security history for a couple centuries. And there, obviously, you're going to see a significant difference, I think, in the relationship between the United States and Russia in a Biden administration. Not in the sense that the United States isn't going to want to work with Russia and find areas of common agreement. Of course, it will. And not in the sense that the Trump administration has not, despite all the rhetoric, kept the commitments it made to Romania and to Central and Eastern Europe militarily in terms of the forward placing of U.S. military, et cetera. But I think the tone will dramatically change. I think you will see a much more, I would say, coherent relationship between acts and words, because I think that's the way President-elect Biden likes to do business. He likes people to understand that he means what he says and backs up his words with actions, but his words reflect his action. They're not in conflict with each other. And I think that's been part of the problem, frankly, the last 4 years, is people have trouble figuring out exactly what the policy is.
Do you think there's a danger to Romania of Biden toughening the terms on the table with Russia, and Romania seen as being sympathetic to American interests? Do you think there's any concern there that somehow they'll tighten the screws on Romania?
Well, that's for Romanians to judge, and they know that better than I do. But I think a more united Europe, a Europe more united with the United States through NATO, is safer for everybody in Europe. I think the fact that there's just been confusion. That's the best way to describe it, is people. That's what I hear from leaders in Europe, Eastern Europe, and Western Europe, is they haven't been clear as to what the red lines are. They haven't been clear about what the goals even are, aside from, as I say, smaller ones like 2% of GDP. Everybody got that one. Yeah. I think in a more strategic sense, I think you're going to have a lot more coherence out of the Biden administration.
Knowing Biden as you do and following him closely and being involved in the campaign, it seems to me that there's sort of like a institution, not an institution, maybe that's not the correct word, but a sense of connection to Western Europe that Biden has had. Even under Obama, somewhat Biden was deputized, it seems, to look after Western Europe, and the President Obama at the time was looking after the tilt towards China and then the Pacific. To what extent do you think this Europeanness of him, the fact that he comes from Ireland, the fact that he's Catholic, the fact that he's from the East Coast, plays into an assessment of how he'll perform towards Romania?
I think the question just answered itself.
Yeah, that's it.
I think you're right. I think you're right, which does not mean he's not going to pay attention to Asia. The fact of the matter is that is the other big superpower now. I mean, frankly, Russia would like to think it's a superpower, but China is really the other superpower now. It's obviously incredibly important in Asia, but as folks in Romania know, it's playing in Romania, it's playing in Eastern Europe, it's playing in Western Europe. And so I think his understanding and relationships in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe are a big deal, both for the continent, but also for the worldwide relations, because, and he believes this very strongly, if Europe and North America stay close together, which was the vision behind NATO, that doesn't just protect North America and Europe, that projects the values that Europeans and Americans share. Yeah. So they're related to each other.
Right. You served obviously as ambassador for a full term, and then you traveled extensively around Romania for your book, Dracula's Dead, about the end of communism and so forth in Romania. So you had to observe the cultural and spiritual life of Romania. As an ambassador, was it difficult to promote and push issues such as gender issues that are high on the agenda in the United States, in a country that tends to be more conservative and more conservative?
I didn't think so, and I don't think so, because in reality, my own view is that Romanian culture has more in common with the United States than Americans or Romanians think it does. As you may have noticed, we just came through an election that was very close in the United States.
Yeah.
A lot of the support for President Trump came from social conservatives who are more socially conservative, frankly, on many of those issues than many Romanians.
Right.
So, that's the beauty of democracy. Everybody's got their values, everybody's got their religious views, their secular views, their priorities, their interests, and you fight it out in elections instead of fighting it out with guns. I mean, that's the good news in Romania and the United States.
When you were named ambassador, what first surprised you going to Romania? Was that the first time you were in Romania?
It was the first time. It was when I came in, driving in from Otepeni, absolutely.
And what sort of surprised you when you started dealing with the Romanians, the officials, and the like?
Well, the thing that was the biggest surprise to me, which is really embarrassing to say, never having been to Romania, driving into Bucharest, literally from the airport, was how developed it was. Because I think many of us in the United States who had never been to a country like Romania, because we were kept out during the Cold War, had a view of underdevelopment, which is true in lots of ways, obviously. And when you get out to the rural areas of Romania, you see it immediately. But I think my impression of Romania was more about the rural areas than it was about the very well-developed cities, the Paris of the East, Bucharest. So that was actually my biggest surprise, was like, wow. In terms of dealing with people, and Sheila, my wife, Sheila Katz, and I, who wrote Dracula's Dead, say it in the book, is because I'm Italian-American, so many people in Romania reminded me of my aunts and uncles in terms of, seriously, in terms of warmth, in terms of being very connected to their families, being very, very kind of smart, and one might say crafty. So actually, once I realized that within about 3 weeks, I was like, oh, I get this. So that's one of the reasons I liked the radio so much, was it reminded me of my Italian roots.
Well, I think that's very true. And Romanians always draw the link between the historical origins of Dacia and so forth. In fact, if you go to the Athenaeum, you see that right all across the top of the hall. I guess we're here about 15 minutes in. So why don't we take a couple questions and
Sure.
And then we'll go right back to the conversation. Well, Luca, do we have anybody with any questions on the line right now?
We do. In fact, Alan Cruz asked, will the Biden-Harris administration support visa waiver for Romanians wishing to visit the USA?
It's a great and very important question, and very high on the list of Alianta's priorities for the new Congress. I don't speak for the president-elect, so I can only speculate. But in general, President-elect Biden has been very supportive of a visa waiver and of the whole effort to encourage. It's part of integration between Europe and the United States. I mean, he sees it as the big picture. I mean, he understands I think that it's important for individual families. It's important for business people. But I mean, this is where he has this bigger view from his experience, is the closer America and Europe and the United States are, the better it is for everybody. And visa waivers will be part of that. That's number one. Number two is obviously Ambassador Gittenstein is very close to Vice President Biden, or President-elect Biden. And when Ambassador Gittenstein led the effort to found Alianta, one of the first things we did was to advocate for visa waiver as part of the comprehensive immigration bill that passed the United States Senate, I believe in 2013, 2014, and never got through the House. I think the issue is there a way that visa waiver effectuated without legislation? That's something Alianta is going to be working on. Love everybody's advice and help on that. Or will it have to be done by immigration? And probably the likelihood of that would be in the context of immigration reform, which is something that the Biden administration, I think, will be very supportive of. I think there's so many priorities right now with the economy and with the health crisis that when that may happen, but I think there'll be a big push for immigration reform, and I think globally, and I think visa waiver could very well be part of that, as it was.
Can you hear us, Jim?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. You were talking about the similarities between the Romanians and the Italian Americans, and I completely understand that, and I see that. The other characteristic of the Romanians is that they have what they call saranjaza. We can sort of figure it out. And if you go back 140 years in Romanian American history, just if we can diverge to history for a second, the Romanians always managed to get their way through with America in World War I, and then in World War II, and then also during the 1980s under Ceausescu, when there's a close relationship. In '69, when Nixon came here, I was at the airport. I was only 13 years old, but I saw it. So the Romanians have a certain practical, pragmatic way of retreating. Can you talk to that a little bit?
No, I think you're exactly right, and I think that fits right in with President Iohannis with President Trump.
Yeah,
we have to have a good relationship here. Oh, I get it. No, I think that's exactly right, but I don't think that is in conflict with shared values, because I do think that there's a reason why, and it's not just Russia, the threat of Russia. There's a reason why Romania became a member of the European Union, became a member of NATO, has worked with the United States in the various circumstances you're describing. Is I think there's a commonality in values that goes beyond the transactions.
Yep.
Luca, go ahead. Yes. So I'm sure that a lot of people have questions about the economy. Here's an example. Dragos Rusu is asking, the US to euro exchange rate decreased in the past months. This discourages the businesses in Romania that invoice in US dollars and pay local Romanian lei. Do you think Biden's win will get the US dollar back up or not?
I have no idea in the world. Currencies is so far above my pay grade that I literally have no idea.
Maybe we'll save that for a conversation about the economy later on.
Yeah, right.
Moving on, Radu Florescu is asking, we know that many Romanian Americans supported the Trump administration. How will a Biden administration convince this same group that he will be supporting US Romanian interests?
Good question.
It is a good question. I don't know, is the truth. I would say beyond that, though, that clearly a Biden administration is going to want to have and try to have very good relations with Romania. There's just no question about that for all the reasons we've been discussing. Because the United States in general wants to do that, and because he in particular knows Romania and cares about it. And he has obviously senior advisors like Ambassador Gittenstein who know Romania even better than he does. So I don't think there's any question that the Biden administration will be very positive in its relationships with Romania. Now, in terms of Romanian American voters, I mean, obviously lots of Romanian American voters, as with some other voters whose families come from Eastern Europe, have a personal history, a political history that has made them in many cases more sympathetic to the Republican Party. Because historically, back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they were seen as tougher on the Soviet Union than the Democrats were. That's changed now to some extent. So it's kind of gotten all, confused in terms of that kind of those symbolic issues. But people generally decide their political loyalties at a relatively young age and stick with them most of their lives. And so I think as younger people vote in the United States, they're going to be looking at what their experiences in their generation. And I think they'll, there's no question, everyone will see a Biden administration that is very positive in its relationships with Romania.
Jim, you were talking earlier about economic connections between the two countries, and obviously high tech is one of the big avenues where the Romanians have distinguished themselves. UiPath, a $10 billion company, remarkable company now, I think based in New York City, but that's not the only one. You want to give us an idea of how that special, I'd say, strategic advantage that Romania has can benefit the overall relationship?
I think it's a really good point. I mean, I think it has benefited the relationship. Obviously, you've got Silicon Valley in Romania and you got Romania in Silicon Valley. I think one of the things that has not gotten as much attention as it should is how the economy is changing as a result of the COVID virus crisis. We know it in terms of our own experiences. People are staying home more and people are getting a lot more stuff delivered. And while restaurants are having a tough time, the Amazons and the big online companies are booming. They're booming. And so I think that's not going to change. And the kind of work that UiPath does, the kind of work that so many Romanian companies do to make the new economy efficient and to make it more user-friendly with AI and everything else, I think that's a big deal for the next decade or so. And I think, again, coming back to the Biden administration, they understand that, I assure you. And so I think it's an opportunity for Romania and its tech capacity to play a bigger role in the future.
Yep. Well, Luca, turning back to our guest, any other questions out there?
We have Mihnea Sebastian Rotariu, who is asking, what position do you think President Biden will have on fighting corruption in Romania? And the second part of the question is, are you expecting for President Biden to appoint a new U.S. ambassador to Romania?
I presume he will appoint an ambassador to Romania at some point. I don't know what the plan is. He cares about it. I mean, one of the things that is interesting, I kid with some of my friends who've been involved in the campaign, and someone will say, well, how do you get to be an ambassador? I say, well, it's luck, so, relax. But Biden, above all people who've been president, with the exception of George H.W. Bush recently, he's the one who's come to the job with the most foreign policy experience. And I wouldn't be surprised, I have no inside knowledge of this at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't a lot of countries in the world where Biden knew a year ago who we wanted to make ambassador because he knows the countries, he knows the players. And I think he's going to care a lot about it. He's going to care a lot about who ambassadors are, including to Romania. So yes, he definitely will appoint an ambassador at some point. I'm sorry, what was the other question? There were two questions.
What President-elect Biden's position will be on fighting corruption in Romania?
Well, it'll be very tough. I mean, again, I come back to Ambassador Gittenstein, who is his close advisor, and folks know that when Ambassador Gittenstein was ambassador, it was the top of his agenda, representing the United States under President Obama and Vice President Biden, was fighting corruption. So I don't think there's any question that it will remain very high on the American agenda. And I mean, the good news is obviously Romania's made a lot of progress. We still have corruption in the United States. There's corruption in China. I mean, but there are degrees of it. And clearly Romania's made progress. And I think that definitely will be high on the list for a Biden administration in its relationship with Romania to help continue that fight.
Speaking of which, Jim, I suppose the Biden administration will be well served by you chipping in and your experience and your thoughts. Would you be open to doing that?
I'm not going into government. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Right, I see. Well, Luca, back to you. Any questions?
We have Brian Jardine asking a security question. do you believe that a Biden-Harris administration will continue to bolster U.S. troop presence in Poland and Romania, and perhaps even reverse the Trump administration's decision to draw down U.S. troops in Germany in order to increase NATO deterrence of an expansionist Russia?
The short answer is, again, I don't speak for the President-elect's team. I would expect that a Biden administration would continue the strong role that NATO plays in the defense of Europe, which includes boots on the ground in Romania and Poland. I think the bigger issue, though, which is I think is the way the president-elect would view it, is the trust that Europeans and European leaders have in the United States. And I think that's the top of his agenda. It's one thing to have boots on the ground. It's another thing to have countries that actually trust each other, working with each other, counting on each other. I literally have had the experience over the past year or two in talking with senior leaders in European countries, not Romania, who have said, because of the perception of a shaky commitment to NATO under the Trump administration, that they're advising their governments to really dramatically reassess the country's security policy, which has been based for 70 years on its alliance in NATO. And I think that's really where you're going to see the focus from the Biden administration, is reestablishing trust between European citizens, European leaders, and the United States. And I think that's what the Russians are afraid of, that the trust and alliance between the United States and Europe will be stronger than ever under President-elect Biden, which I think it will be.
Jim, do you think that the Western leaders, Macron and Merkel and whoever else is out there, are ready to drop their kind of standard do-it-alone policies that they've been talking about now for about 2 years? Do you think they're ready to accept American primacy once again in terms of that alliance or that understanding?
Again, I don't know. I don't speak for them. I'm American. I'm not French. I'm not German. But my impression is that most European leaders want the United States to play a leadership role. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be major players at the table, but they want the United States to be play the kind of role that it has historically, and very, very successful. I mean, there's a reason that people in countries like Romania wanted to join NATO, wanted to join the European Union. It's because it was successful.
Yeah.
So I think the Biden administration will very much focus on reinforcing and building on that success and overcoming some of the distrust that has grown in the last couple of years.
In a way, what you're saying is, to some extent, trying to recapture the Obama legacy that was chipped away at. And I guess that also touches on joining the Paris environmental agreements again.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, that's been very public. I mean, the president-elect, the United States is going to go back into the Paris Accords, going to go back into the WHO. I can't remember all the other things the United States has pulled out of. So there's a whole list.
Asian trade agreements and so on.
Right. I mean, it's very clear that President-elect Biden believes in international cooperation. And one of the points he makes, which again is kind of obvious, but it's important, is we understand that international cooperation was important. The pandemic should have taught us a new lesson. It's an international pandemic. Romania can't protect itself by itself. America can't protect itself by itself. And so, and that's going into vaccines now. I mean, we're going to be, over the next year or so, dealing with what happens with vaccines. Well, there are going to be shortages of vaccines for everybody to begin with. And so we can either have what we had this spring in the United States, I don't know exactly how it was in Romania and in Europe, but we had hospitals fighting with hospitals over getting protective equipment, over getting tests. And it was a mess, actually. And so the Biden transition team is way down the road in terms of trying to figure out and coming up with a plan for the United States, but in cooperation with folks around the world, as to how we get the kind of interventions to defeat the virus sooner rather than later. I mean, that's clearly the top of their agenda, and it should be.
It's a good thing, I guess, that Pfizer's relatively good news today falls very comfortably as a gift on Biden's lap. 90% effective, which is very good news. I remember when we were talking to Mr. Arafat, who's like the Fauci of Romania.
Right.
He was saying that I said, are you comfortable that you're going to have sufficient allocations for the Romanian people? He said, yeah, we leave it to Brussels. So it's up to the Europeans to take whatever's coming, whether it be from the United States, England, or whatever, and dole it out fairly across. So maybe we'll get back to not America first, Romania first, France first, but a different point of view. And maybe the coronavirus will be the way to demonstrate that sense of collectivism, not just for Europe, for the world. We said we'd keep it around a half an hour. We're on a half an hour right now. Raluca, can I go back to you with any questions?
That was the last question. And I did want to remind people who joined later that our main event with Ambassador Markenstein and Mircea Joană had been postponed. We had to postpone it because of unforeseen events. Please stand by for a new date. And I hope that in the meantime, you enjoyed the conversation with John Florescu and Ambassador Jim Rosapepe. And John, back to you.
Jim, thank you very much. I think it was, well, maybe foreseen circumstances, which was the election on Saturday. So that just took the whole house of cards and threw it up. And that's how come we had this change of event that we only notified a short while ago. But it's a terrific thing because we got the feedback from an ambassador who knows Romania well right after the campaign. It was a first of, so I thank you very much, Jim, for that. And we'll let you know about the rest. And also the lecture from Professor Dilettant that's ready to go as soon as we reschedule. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. It's nice to see so many longtime friends on the call. Look forward to working with you.
So long. Bye-bye.